Hello everybody, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to VascAgeNet Webinar 4. My name is Dr. Rachel Climby and I'm the lead of Working Group 5 within the European Cost Action VascAgeNet. VascAgeNet is a network of researchers from Europe, the US and Australia. Hello everybody, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to VascAgeNet Webinar 4. My name is Dr. Rachel. Oh, sorry about that, some technical difficulties. So VascAgeNet is a network of researchers from Europe, the US and Australia who are all working together to refine, harmonise and promote the use of vascular ageing measures in order to improve clinical practice and reduce the burden of cardiovascular disease globally. So before we get started today, I just would like to run over a few housekeeping points. So firstly, your microphone should be muted. If it's not, please make sure that it is now. Secondly, there'll be 20 minutes at the end of the webinar for you to ask questions. If you would like to ask a question, you can either click on the raise hand icon and I can unmute you so that you can ask your question, or you can post your question in the chat and I can ask it for you. This webinar is being live streamed on YouTube and will be recorded and shared on our website following the webinar. Finally, we'll not be able to assist with any technical difficulties that arise throughout the webinar. So it is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Professor Peter Nilsson. Professor Nilsson is a Professor of Clinical Cardiovascular Research at Lund University in Sweden. He has extensive experience leading large-scale population-based screening studies, focusing on cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes, and is an expert in early vascular ageing. His other fields of interest include gene-environment interactions behind the development of obesity and type 2 diabetes, and early life programming of adult disease. So welcome, Professor Nilsson, and thank you very much for delivering this webinar. I'll ask you to now please share your screen and your slides and to take it away.
Thank you very much, Rachel. It's a pleasure to attend this seminar, and I will try to keep on time, maybe somewhat around 40 minutes. You see the title of my presentation is here. Why do some people display early vascular aging and how can I modify my vascular age? I try to be
Sorry, just to interrupt. Your screen is not on full screen. If you would like to put it on full screen.
Okay, like this?
Yes, down the bottom.
Okay, we continue on that. And the full screen on my slide, I click here. Okay.
Yep, thank you very much.
Okay. So I will address this issue, and as you told, I'm a professor of clinical cardiovascular research at the Lund University. I'm also a adjunct professor at the Southern Denmark University in Odense, Denmark. I've been working on vascular aging for a number of years now, also together with my colleagues all across Europe, but especially in Paris, Professor Stéphane Laurent, Professor Pierre Bottery, Rosa Marie Bruno and other colleagues. So I will try to be updated, and I will also be happy to share my slides with you. If anybody is interested to have my slides, you can send me an email or contact Rachel. So basically, I'm interested in aging. We all undergo aging, as illustrated by these cartoons from folklore, Swedish art. The problem is that some people have unsuccessful aging as compared to other people having successful aging, and what affects the body in general and biology in general will of course also affect the vascular system. Already back in 1996, I presented a medical hypothesis related to premature aging in general. And then I moved on to the aging of the cardiovascular system, especially of large elastic arteries. And that was the background for introducing the concept of early vascular aging way back in 2008 in two papers, one of them together with my colleagues from France and Spain. This slide, you see what is very familiar to you. Two processes, arteriosclerosis to the left, atherosclerosis to the right. And as you know, the arteriosclerosis starts in the media of the arterial wall of large elastic arteries, but also other layers are involved. And many people think that this starts very early in life, and this is why I have an interest also in the early life programming of arterial stiffness and vascular aging. Of course, atherosclerosis is very proximal to the cardiovascular event itself, but observational studies have indicated that both arteriosclerosis and atherosclerosis can independently predict cardiovascular outcomes. And in my view, these two processes, one starting in the media, the other in the intima, will be more or less intertwined later on in life, and together synergistically influence the cardiovascular risk. But for decades, people have been interested mostly in atherosclerosis. During the last 15 years or so, more towards arteriosclerosis. We know from many studies that there is an age relation with the pulse wave velocity, the measure of arterial stiffness, especially in the aorta. As you can see on this slide, this is especially pronounced in the thoracic part of the aorta that will stiffen typically with age. So we are interested to understand the background of this, how it works, who is affected, and what can be done about this. This concept of early vascular aging, it was also introduced by the Lancet Commission on Hypertension in 2016, a more developed view on this, as you can see in red, early vascular aging, then in blue, average life course, and in green, the ideal life course. And you see that very early in life, there is not much of a difference between the lines, but later on, they separate. And our mission is not to make people live forever, no, but to have normal people living their normal lives. And we can learn much from special populations of longevity. I will come back to that. So why do some people display early vascular aging? As we can measure it by different methods, especially the carotid femoral pulse wave velocity, the golden standard for aortic arterial stiffness, that is the hallmark of early vascular aging. Of course, there are genetics in the background. There are interesting differences according to ethnicity, early life programming, conditions for fetus and during the first year of life, shared family factors, adult lifestyle and culture modified by sex and gender, but also socioeconomic status during the life course, very important perspective, risk factor accumulation, many comorbidities, and finally, adverse physical exposures. For example, Professor Pierre Bottery has studied this in relation to space medicine and the influence of weightlessness and radiation. Certain drugs that are anti-angiogenic that could also impact on arterial stiffness. So there are many reasons or factors in the background to influence the development of early vascular aging. On this slide, you see in black to the left, the black line, this is Hutchinson-Gilford Progeria syndrome, a very rare condition, a genetic condition affected perhaps 1 in a million. It's a true progeric syndrome with early, very premature aging. Children are affected at the age of 10. They die as old men and women at the age of 15, 16. Pure genetic model. There are also other pure models. However, there are also people enjoying very long lives. This is the French lady Jean Calment living 122 years So some people are lucky to have a long life. Maybe protective genes or protective lifestyle could add to this, but also random effects could influence such a long lifespan. Then we have some clinical conditions, like patients with chronic kidney disease. This is a model of increased cardiovascular risk, increased arterial stiffness, but not all are affected in the same way. And another perspective is to study these few individuals who escape the bad things. For example, patients with type 1 diabetes or chronic kidney disease with no complications. This is like a model for research, not only to look for the bad things, but also for protective factors. Finally, in the right corner, you see the naked mole rat. I will not go into the details, but this is an animal model of prolonged life and many protective factors to be more studied. In Malmö, Sweden, we have different cohorts. And just to show you one slide from our genetic studies related to arterial stiffness, carotid femoral pulse-wave velocity, we have analyzed different genetic risk scores for arterial stiffness. And I want you to focus on the genetic risk score for fasting glucose in the non-diabetic population. This means that hyperglycemia is a trait, a biological trait with a causal relationship to arterial stiffness in the non-diabetic population. And building on that, we know that improved lifestyle, even some drugs could lower hyperglycemia, and that will bring us some opportunities to influence arterial stiffness. We have also collected data on family history from the Malmö diet cancer cohort. And here you can see in red, people reporting a positive family history of cardiovascular disease, men and women, as well as a positive family history of type 2 diabetes. So there must be a familiar clustering of vascular aging, arterial stiffness with this background that is not only influenced by genetics, but also by shared family factors like shared lifestyle or other family-related factors. Ethnicity should be taken into account because there might be interesting differences, not only in biology, but also in lifestyle, social circumstances, etc., to influence what we see on this slide from a very recent review by Alta Skytte, the president of the International Society of Hypertension, and many co-workers, to show you that in African American women and men, the age-related increase of pulse-wave velocity vascular aging is more pronounced as compared to European American women and men. So there must be something linked to ethnicity that should be better studied to understand the rate of aging of the cardiovascular system and how it's influenced. The authors summarize as this, that it's important to identify early vascular aging across ethnic groups and to learn from this when treatment is discussed. Some individuals have stiffer vessels than others and are at high cardiovascular risk. So we need more studies from all over the globe, from different populations, different ethnicities, because most of the studies so far are very restricted, limited according to ethnicity. So there is a need for more studies in many, many countries to evaluate the process of early vascular aging. However, also within the same ethnic group, like these Cameroonian pygmies, it has been shown that a change of lifestyle could impact on the rate of vascular aging, arterial stiffness. For example, here you see that some of these traditional pygmies, they do not increase the pulse-wave velocity related to aging, but this is the case for these individuals who move into the cities in black here and change their lifestyle. Also, the Bantu farmers adapting a change of lifestyle will show this age-related increase in pathway velocity. So it's not only a matter of ethnicity itself, it's the interaction between ethnicity and lifestyle factors, social factors that matters for this development. This is a slide from Spain, from an ongoing study, early vascular aging study in Spain, with a group of researchers interested to know more about lifestyle in relation to EVA. So you can see that people reporting more sedentary time, less physical activity per week, they have increased risk of EVA. The same is true for some other risk markers like increased triglycerides, abdominal obesity, HOMA, insulin resistance, a mark of insulin resistance, and uric acid. So in the population, we see a picture that poor lifestyle is associated with increased risk of EVA. I would like to say a few words about gender differences. Everybody knows that cardiovascular risk is somewhat delayed in women compared to men, and that is probably caused by the protective influence of female sex hormones until the menopausal transition. Why is this so? Because there are not only biological factors explaining this, but also lifestyle and social factors, gender issues. And I would like to highlight this very recent review from the Lancet discussing sex and gender in relation to disease. So in green, you see illustrated biological sex, but in purple, you see gender constructs. And living men and women are influenced, of course, by their biology, but also to a very large extent by these gender constructs. And future studies have to address both, I think. We must know more about biological traits, of course, to tailor the right therapy to the right individual, but we also need to know more about the gender aspects, because compliance, for example, of the treatment is influenced by gender aspects. So this is why this is very important, and I encourage you to study these aspects more, also in relation to EVA. Now comes my favorite topic here, the early life programming. And I guess you know rather well that low birth weight in relation to gestational age is a risk marker of future cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes. This is especially relevant for small babies growing large, so-called catch-up growth, visible during the first few years of life. So many observational studies have evaluated these associations, and to me, it provides a very strong argument in favor of preventive maternal and child health care, also to prevent adult cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes. This is the definition of programming, not only restricted to in utero or early life, but there might also be other time windows, for example, around puberty, that could be of importance for programming of organ function and thereby adult cardiovascular risk. A schematic view here on the relationship between early life factors to the left and the short-term and long-term consequences. So that could be short-term influences on vascular function and structure, even on nephron number and metabolic programming. But in the long run, this could relate to also vascular aging. But is this an influence on nature or nurture? This is a very important scientific question, because there are research believing in the fact that genetics could explain most of it. They argue that maternal genes for hypertension will increase the risk of hypertension in their offspring, but also as a side effect will lower the birth weight of the offspring. So whether low birth weight or restricted fetal growth is influenced by genes or by environmental factors or some interaction is still something we don't know exactly, but we should try to investigate this more in detail. From Malmö, Sweden, one of the first studies came in the British Medical Journal in 1988. This Dr. Genser, he analyzed the association between fetal growth and blood pressure at the age of 18 in young men undergoing military conscript testing. The same year, in British Medical Journal, the famous David Barker published similar data from the UK, similar observations that low birth weight, early life factors could impact on a risk of increased blood pressure in later life. Personally, I was also involved in 1997 in an early study linking the medical birth register of Sweden with the military conscript testing register, showing the inverse association between birth weight and systolic blood pressure. Of course, these differences between deciles is not very great, but in a very large sample, it's very clear picture, but only in boys. Prematurity is another factor to influence blood pressure levels, and everything that impacts on blood pressure levels will also impact on arterial structure and function. So there is, of course, a relationship between blood pressure regulation, hemodynamics, and the arterial structure and function. From Spain, Professor Empalorbe, we know that low birth weight is associated with increased augmentation index, another marker of changes in the central hemodynamics, also related to arterial stiffness, but in a more complex way than pulse wave velocity alone. This is a study from Austria, the Early Vascular Aging EVA study group, showing you that when babies are compared term appropriate for gestational age babies with term small for gestational age babies, there is a significant difference according to pulse wave velocity in adolescents during follow-up. So there must be a factor during early life that is of importance for programming not only of blood pressure regulation, but also for arterial structure and function, as illustrated here by differences in pulse wave velocity. I will not deal too much on the mechanism, but I encourage you to study this more, as it's very, very fascinating, and many study groups are trying to dig into this. One argument has been that the elastin content of the arterial wall is preformed during fetal life. So you can easily understand that if there are adverse conditions during fetal life, the growth in uteri is impaired, and thereby also the elastin content of the arterial wall. And as the elastin content will gradually decrease during the life course, it's very important how much you start with at birth. If you start with a lower elastin content, it will be more rapidly depleted as compared to somebody with a normal birth weight, normal fetal development, with a higher content of elastin in the arterial wall. Other people have been interested to investigate the sympathetic nervous system by microneurography. And it has been shown that during follow-up, the sympathetic nervous activation is more pronounced in subjects with a history of being small for gestational age, as seen on this slide, as compared to normal babies appropriate for gestational age birth weight. Also, preeclampsia is of importance as preeclampsia is a dangerous condition in pregnant women with high blood pressure, edema, proteinuria. You know it very well, and it will also affect pulse wave velocity that could be a factor harming these women in later life, also their children. So based on this systematic review and meta-analysis, the pulse wave velocity is its highest during the second trimester. And some people argue that the measurement of arterial stiffness could be added to the evaluation of pregnant women, especially with risk conditions, because it provides some interesting information also for the prediction of later overt preeclampsia. But it's not only early life and childhood. Here we see a study from adolescents and the development of pulse wave velocity in two groups. In red, the metabolically healthy children and adolescents, and in blue, the metabolically unhealthy children and adolescents. And you see that the fat gain, the increased obesity will impact on the more rapid increase of pulse wave velocity in these children. So later in life, they are probably at risk of cardiovascular disease based on this. It also provides an argument that such children and adolescents with obesity should be helped to improve their lifestyle to stop this development for further obesity. I discussed comorbidities, and this is a slide to show you that patients with chronic kidney disease stage 5, they have a more advanced biological age as compared to the chronological age. This is a model of premature aging in general, affecting all organs and the whole body. And of course, most of them also have signs of atherosclerosis, arterial stiffness, increased pulse wave velocity. But my interest, as I mentioned to you, is to focus not only on the bad things, but also in the few patients escaping stiffness, escaping atherosclerosis in spite of this condition. So we're trying to set up studies with focus on these escapers. Here is a study from Malmö to evaluate the non-hemodynamic predictors of arterial stiffness during a long-term follow-up. And in summary, it was shown that there are two clusters of factors. One cluster here in green are related to arterial stiffness, arteriosclerosis, pulse wave velocity, but some other factors, in our opinion, are more related to atherosclerosis. This is to show that there are two entities, arteriosclerosis, atherosclerosis, with different background patterns of risk factors. I also mentioned the influence of drugs. This is a beautiful study from France showing that by treatment using anti-angiogenic drugs, arterial stiffness will increase like a side effect. Why? Because that will decrease the influence of micro vessel function and thereby increasing stiffness. So what we call stiffness is also influenced by factors in the arterial adventitia, including these small vessels that can be stopped by anti-angiogenic drugs. Together with my friends in France and in Portugal, we have developed this concept further, not only EVA and healthy vascular aging, but also the supernova hypothesis that some people are protected in spite of a risk factor burden. And we try to study them more to learn more about protective factors. Here you can also see from the distribution that at the far left, we have a small group of people, supernova people, protected from vascular aging, arterial stiffness, in spite of the risk factor burden. Now in press is this publication when we have also tried to analyze the prediction of cardiovascular events in relation to these three categories, because it's very important to show that the supernova people are indeed protected from cardiovascular risk and events in the long term. And I've been told it's in press now in November in hypertension. So what can I do about vascular aging? Genetics, no, we cannot change them. Shared family factors, yes, like lifestyle or other conditions in the families. Geographical factors we could learn from healthy populations. Early life programming, this is an argument in favor of preventive maternal and child health. But I also want you to think about so-called upstream factors versus downstream factors. The downstream factors are focused on the individual, your lifestyle, your risk factor control, stress reduction, the drugs you are exposed to. But upstream factors are more related to society, social conditions on a structural level. And these factors are also very great importance to understand why people age so differently. I mentioned longevity populations, and there is a small island in Greece, Icaria, where people have been studying the pulse wave velocity in these people in Icaria in blue versus some control subjects here in red as reference population. I guess this is the influence of Mediterranean diet, a healthy lifestyle, the sunshine, but maybe also some genetic factors. So this is one model of longevity populations. Another model is in Japan. I've been in contact with Japanese colleagues to evaluate pulse wave velocity as measured by the brachial ankle pulse wave velocity method in the Nagano prefecture to your left versus the Wakayama prefecture to your right. The Nagano prefecture has now replaced Okinawa to have the most long-lived population, the most healthy population in Japan. Okinawa has declined because a US Air Force base there introduced Western lifestyle to a large extent. So the lifestyle habits in Okinawa have changed very much. The situation in Nagano is different, more like Scandinavian style of climate, cold winters. Winter Olympics were held there some years ago. And then we compare these two districts, prefectures. So you see that especially in the people aged 70 years and above, the pulse wave velocity in people from Nagano was lower as compared to the Wakayama people, indicating less pronounced vascular aging. This is especially true for people not reporting an intention to change lifestyle. They are more indifferent to their lifestyle. They don't care to so much. The consequence is a higher rate of increased pulse wave velocity. So in a long-lived population, adopting healthy lifestyle we see protection based on this comparison. Well, there are many ideas how to slow cardiovascular aging, like calorie restriction, eating an appropriate diet, Mediterranean diet, also to have a regular exercise, and according to calorie restriction, this has previously been shown to be the only method to increase lifespan in mammals, like in rodents, also in monkeys. In the United States, there are some dedicated people, some humans who adopt this, but there are no study results to show that they prolong their life. In fact, they slow down hormonal systems, so they live like in slow motion, some people joke. But nevertheless, they believe in calorie restriction. Hibernation, like some animals do, is also a way to conserve resources, much like calorie restriction. A slide to show you some of the effects of calorie restriction, metabolic adaptation, and of course also the vascular system is affected. The problem is, of course, that not everybody is willing to undergo calorie restriction, and it could even be dangerous if it will lead to starvation and famine. For example, now with COVID-19, we know that people who are obese, they are at risk, but also people who lose weight very rapidly, they are in a negative metabolic condition, might risk the downregulation of T lymphocytes, and my opinion is that they also risk more COVID-19 infection. But people are interested because there is a hypothesis that calorie restriction can slow aging in general, and thereby also cardiovascular aging, still to be proven. Mediterranean diet has been tested in this randomized controlled trial for 12 months in the Netherlands. No, it was a European multi-center trial, and as you can see here, no effect on pulse wave velocity itself, but on augmentation index, favoring the ones who had a Mediterranean diet for 1 year. Also, physical exercise is of great importance, and the more you exercise, the exercise intensity, the more the pulse wave velocity will change to be reduced. Of course, this is a matter of motivation, also the capacity to do the exercise. It's easier for younger people, of course, as compared to elderly people. So there are many background factors to take into account too. In Austria, there is the EVA Tyrol study, ongoing study, with the intention to promote health, especially in young people, in adolescents, to counteract this vascular aging, EVA development. I think it's very interesting, and we should keep an eye on this study to learn more about the outcome. Here you see a conventional slide representing healthy and unhealthy lifestyle. But in the background, you should also consider that people do have lifestyles as a consequence of background factors, social factors. I guess that the man to your left has more adverse social factors in the background as compared to the man to your right. There are many studies to show this, and it's so important to take this into consideration when we discuss rate of aging, including vascular aging, that people live different lives. The lifestyle choice is not only like a free choice, it's so much influenced by background social factors. For example, on this slide, you see the conventional message, what can be done to slow the cardiovascular aging by healthy lifestyle, avoiding some bad things, and eventually also to take drugs if needed. But this is so individualistic. It's focused on the individual only. Of course, we should advise patients, we should advise people to adopt a healthy lifestyle. I fully support that. But in addition, we must remember that social background structure and social factors could play important roles. On this slide, you see from the Whitehall 2 prospective court study in London, civil servants, that background factors are of great importance when the development of pulse wave velocity across a few years is analyzed. So the household income has a very great importance to understand this development, and also the other factors shown here. Here is a study from Finland on pulse wave velocity development in relation to socioeconomic status, not only in childhood, but also in adult life. So in group 1, you see people with a low socioeconomic status in childhood, but also in adulthood. And for the other groups, you can read down yourself. So the worst condition here, socially speaking, is to have adverse social factors both in childhood and in adult life. These social factors are, of course, mediated by biological changes and by lifestyle and many unknown factors, but we cannot understand EVA, we cannot understand cardiovascular aging only by analyzing biological factors in the individual, because these social factors are acting on another level of understanding. So we must apply a multi-level approach for analyzing these things. So here you see the conventional message for the individual aiming for prevention of EVA: non-smoking, regular physical activity, normal sleep, Mediterranean diet, check your blood pressure, and control of risk factors. Yes. However, this is more like a personal thinking. I think after a long life as a physician and a researcher, we should also convey this message not only to patients, but also to ourselves and to our friends, that we should accept ourselves and our own aging. We should enjoy the only life we have on earth without too many worries. Of course, sometimes we have to worry about real things. We should do, but not to get stuck in the worries. And this is a difficult thing, a philosophical thing, that people who only focus on themselves, their own health, their own arteries, their own heart, they get too narrow-minded. But other people trying to reach out to, for example, helping others or engaging themselves in a broader network, they feel better, and their system, biological system, I think, is also in a better shape. So in summary, I told you about risk factors of EVA with genetic predisposition, adverse early life programming, unhealthy lifestyle, poor socioeconomic conditions, and exposure to burden of risk factors and comorbidities. This can be studied in many epidemiological studies, but we should also focus on the people escaping all these bad things in spite of risk factor burden, the supernova people or people from longevity populations. The general advice for risk factor control and healthy lifestyle, as I have told you, this message has shortcomings because a very narrow focus on middle-aged people and individualistic prevention. And this is my final statement here, that the perspective on upstream factors may include preventive maternal and child health, social reform, and gender equity to normalize cardiovascular aging within a life course perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Nilsson, for this very interesting talk. I really enjoyed your philosophical advice that you provided there. So if anyone has any questions for Professor Nilsson, please post them in the chat box now, or you can raise your hand and I can unmute you so that you can ask your question. While people are gathering their thoughts and putting some questions together. I do have some that were emailed through earlier that I'll present to you now. So one question was, how can clinicians translate the use of indices such as vascular aging index together with risk prediction to make it easy for middle-aged patients to see and readily accept these markers of vascular aging as an accurate diagnosis, especially when trying to implement lifestyle changes?
Well, we know very well that people are very interested in everything we measure. We can talk with people, but if we can add any kind of measurements, they get even more interested. People are just fascinated by technical measurements. I'm skeptical to tell people something based only on one measurement. Ideally, you should have repeated measurement to avoid bias. That could be technical errors or changes from day to day, etc. But I think that the time is now more positive to include measures of arterial stiffness, vascular aging, not only as such, but as a way to attract the interest, not only of patients, but also of physicians and nurses and staff, because these health professionals are more willing to provide prevention if we can tell them a story. This is like storytelling. EVA is a story. And if you have a good story, people listen up even better. And within this story, you can measure that and that and that.
Okay, great. Another question that was emailed. In your opinion, how should we combine best the molecular, functional and structural parameters into one unified measure of vascular age?
Well, this is a Nobel Prize question. I think we are doing better and better. Some of us are interested in molecular science. Some are interested in the opposite, like population-based cohort studies. But we must learn from each other. And I think so far, the carotid femoral pulse-wave velocity is a good measure. We can also measure, of course, brachial ankle pulse-wave velocity. There are other ways to do that, but it should be combined with, of course, other kind of information like family history, personal lifestyle, many background factors. I'm very skeptical just to pick only one thing and to act on that as a physician. But I can use one thing, stiffness, as a key to open up the door to the patient or to my colleagues to increase their interest. Because if people are motivated, they will do much better. This is the same for physicians as patients. So I hope in the future we will have a more integrated approach to do this research. But for the moment, I think that different measures of pulse wave velocity is the best we can get as a useful risk marker.
And I've got a question for you. So I'm wondering about the most opportune time to start intervening when we believe that, or to prevent EVA, I guess. So should we be intervening?
Most physicians like myself, they meet patients, middle-aged patients with a number of risk factors like metabolic syndrome or other adverse conditions. They try to convey the traditional healthy lifestyle message. They often fail. Why do they fail? It's too late. And many of these background social factors will stop people from listening, will decrease the motivation. So, of course, this is a very strong argument to focus on children, on adolescents, but even more to focus on pregnant women. And the new idea is not only to focus on pregnancy itself, but also what is called preconception health. Preconception health is extremely important because women will not know that they are pregnant until like 4, 5, 6, 7 weeks into pregnancy. And then they take a pregnancy test. Oh, I'm pregnant. And then they stop smoking and drinking alcohol. So a good advice for young people, this also affects young men willing to be fathers is to improve the lifestyle already before pregnancy, to avoid detrimental, harmful effects by epigenetic imprinting of smoking, for example. So early life focus is my idea. And added to that, I think it's appropriate to ask for family history. Family history brings us some interesting information. So, but some people, they don't know very much. So when I ask them as a physician, tell me about your family history of cardiovascular disease or type 2 diabetes. Oh, I don't know so much. Then I ask them, please go and ask your parents, your relatives, and come back to me for the next visit. Tell me more about your family history, because I think it's such an important tool to find the appropriate target population. Because if there is a very substantial positive family history of these things, you could expect arterial stiffness, you could expect vascular aging early on, and then you can use this positive family history as a motivational tool, because people are a bit afraid. So if they know something is going on in their families, they will listen even more to you. So early life focus plus family history.
Okay, great. So we've got a few questions that have come through from the audience. So one that is just related to the previous question. How do you think countries or societies that are being influenced by Western lifestyles should act to avoid or diminish the onset of early vascular aging?
Well, I don't think that you can eradicate Western lifestyle when it has been once introduced. You cannot take it away unless there is a financial recession or a war or some disasters. We don't want that. But you can add something. You can, for example, city planning, you can have more parks, more areas for physical activity. You can promote healthy eating by playing with taxes. Healthy food should be cheap. Nowadays is rather expensive, fruits and vegetables in some countries, and the harmful things should be expensive, like cigarettes.
Yes. So another question, is vascular remodeling, does this occur in patients with low birth weight?
Well, you should understand that low birth weight could be the consequence of prematurity, or it could be the consequence of small for gestational age, even in term babies. These are two different things. In prematurity, we know very well that the vascular tree is underdeveloped, less capillaries, less sprouting, and less elastin. In small for gestational babies, we see about the same, but there could be also some other hallmarks. We still have to analyze this much more. And of course, also to do it separately in boys and girls. But there is no exact answer at the moment.
Yeah. Okay, great. Another question, in your opinion, which is better, more exercise or less calories?
Oh, I think that normal people should have normal lives, and it's better to include some exercise like being non-sedentary, taking your bicycle, taking the stairs, walking extra, than to do the more intensive exercise. Some young people can do that, and some motivated people can continue on that. But to eat less is very hard for normal people. I think we should not focus on the low calorie concept as such, but on a balanced diet with adequate calorie intake for the exercise we do. However, there is also an argument for the so-called 5+2 concept, eating what you want more or less and try to reduce for 2 days. A variant of this is to avoid eating after 6 or 7 in the evening and have your breakfast at 7, because then you have like 12 hours of fasting I think this is also good for the body. But I think it's too difficult to tell people that you should starve. I don't believe in that. I believe in enjoying your life, enjoying your food, having a balanced diet, and do some exercise. It's much better.
Yes, it's much more enjoyable. So another question, how important is it to measure pulse wave velocity from central arteries for early stage screening of EVA other than the carotid to femoral as a whole?
Well, this is a technical question. I think that all around the world, there are different traditions to measure arterial stiffness. In Japan and in France and in Sweden, people prefer different devices. But whatever you do to measure, please repeat it, because single measurements will not be enough. You should try to have repeated measurements, whatever your method is, and then to use that in a dialogue with the people. Of course, on the one hand, we want to push research to find the best device, the best methods, and the best understanding. But on the other hand, we have to find simple, reasonable solutions for the clinical setting, and to use whatever we can to promote motivation and a dialogue with the patient, like the storytelling, plus some measurements.
Okay, another related question. Because there is a complex relationship between arterial stiffness and blood pressure, is it necessary to distinguish between the two when understanding vascular aging? If so, what is the best way to do it through our measurement?
Well, we know from some studies, for example, Framingham, that arterial stiffness at baseline will predict hypertension later on. So there is something independent from blood pressure with arterial stiffness, independent component. But we also know for sure that there is interplay all the time between hemodynamics, blood pressure regulation, hypertension, and arterial stiffness, vascular aging. I think that, for example, in Spain, Empalube, she's doing a lot of studies in children and adolescents applying 24-hour ambulatory blood pressure recordings plus measurement of central hemodynamics. So in research, we can do this, but in clinical practice, I think we cannot do everything to everybody. But if we invite young people, children, adolescents from risk families, this is also ethically correct. It will be much welcome. So my idea is not to reach out for everybody, but to start somewhere. And I believe starting with offspring of families at high risk is the best way.
Okay, great. So we've got one last question here for you. So could we predict someone's biological age from vascular age, and how does this compare to other organs' age?
Yes, this is a difficult question. Do all organs age the same way? It's not certain, but we think there is reason to believe that vascular aging, arterial stiffness will reflect aging also in other organs, more or less, but there might be exceptions. For example, we have patients with kidney transplantation, and then it can be studied how this healthy kidney will undergo aging in relation to other organs. So there are models to study this, but I think that for the moment we have different measures of aging, like gray hair or wrinkles or arterial stiffness or poor lung function, but we do not have a perfect measurement of biological clock aging. People had hoped for telomeres, but this is also quite complicated.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. I've seen a couple more questions pop in, but in the interest of time, we might just end the webinar there. So thank you very much, Peter, for this really great...
One last word. As I told you, if you want my slides, I can provide you with a PDF of my slides. I also welcome additional questions sent to me via email or to Rachel, you can forward to me. Thank you, friends, and good luck now with VascAgeNet. It's so fascinating that the young people will take over and you will solve so many problems that I haven't been able to solve. So good luck for the future. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, and have a good rest of your day, everybody. Thank you. Bye.